Shakira KH was born into a prestigious and wealthy Muslim family with deep royal connections. Her grandfather, Sira Ism, was once the Dewan, chief minister, of the Mysore royal family, a position of great power and influence. Growing up, Shakira had everything: luxury, status, and immense wealth. She inherited vast properties in Mumbai and Bengaluru, making her a billionaire. Her beauty and sophistication were well known in high society. However, despite her privilege, her life took a tragic turn when she mysteriously disappeared in 1991. What followed was a chilling tale of deception, greed, and an unimaginable crime that remained undiscovered for years. Shakira was married to Akbar KH, a respected diplomat in the Indian Foreign Service. Due to his career, he frequently traveled abroad, leaving Shakira to manage her business and personal affairs independently. Despite their high social standing, their marriage was not perfect. Shakira was a successful real estate entrepreneur and owned multiple luxury properties, but she had one deep sorrow. She desperately longed for a son. She and Akbar had 4 daughters, and while she loved them dearly, she felt incomplete without a male heir. This emotional struggle, along with the frequent absence of her husband, created tension in her life. The loneliness and unfulfilled desire for a son made her vulnerable to external influences, setting the stage for the tragedy that was to unfold. In 1983, Shakira attended a grand royal event in Delhi, hosted by the Nawab of Rampur, a prestigious occasion where India's elite gathered. It was there that she met a man named Srinand, whose real name was Murli Manohar Mishra. He was originally from Sagar in Madhya Pradesh and worked as a property manager for the Nawab of Rampur. But beyond his real estate expertise, he had another intriguing side. He claimed to have knowledge of occult practices and spiritual powers. At the time, Shakira was deeply worried about the new land-sealing laws that threatened her vast estate. When she met Srinand and discovered his skills in property management and taxation, she was impressed. However, what truly drew her toward him was his claim that he could help her achieve what she desired most, a son. Srinand saw her vulnerability and began manipulating her emotions, using her fears and wishes to his advantage. Over time, Shakira started trusting Srinand completely. He performed rituals and made her believe that his mystical powers could help her have a son. As months passed, their relationship deepened, and Srinand took full advantage of her faith in him. By 1985, under his influence, Shakira made a shocking decision. She divorced her husband, Akbar KH. Her decision sent shockwaves through her family and society. A year later, in 1986, she took an even bolder step by marrying Srinand, a man who had no royal background or social standing. This unexpected marriage infuriated her family, who felt she had not only disgraced them but had also acted irrationally. Most of her relatives severed ties with her in anger. Even her own daughters, except for her youngest one, distanced themselves from her, choosing to live with their father instead. However, Shakira, completely under Srinand's influence, remained unfazed and dedicated herself to her new life with him. After marrying Srinand, Shakira moved into her grand mansion at 81 Richmond Road, Bengaluru, taking her youngest daughter with her. This luxurious home, which reflected her immense wealth, had always belonged to her. However, despite its grandeur, Shakira's life was becoming more isolated. She had alienated her family, and only her youngest daughter remained by her side. Meanwhile, her daughter Saba KH, who had inherited her mother's striking beauty, had dreams of becoming a model. She decided to move to Mumbai to pursue her career, but stayed in touch with her mother. Though Saba visited occasionally, Shakira's social circle had shrunk dramatically. The man she had trusted and married had cut her off from her family, making her completely dependent on him. Yet, at this point, no one could have predicted the horrifying fate that awaited her in the very house she considered her safe haven. As time passed, Shakira KH continued her life with Srinand in her grand mansion at 81 Richmond Road, Bengaluru. But her connections with her family grew weaker. Her eldest daughters had already distanced themselves, while her youngest daughter stayed with her. However, her daughter Saba KH, who had moved to Mumbai to pursue a modeling career, remained in touch with her mother through regular phone calls. For years, despite their strained family ties, Shakira would still communicate occasionally with her mother and other relatives. But suddenly, in April 1991, all communication from Shakira stopped. Saba noticed that she hadn't heard from her mother for several days, which was unusual. Concerned, she tried calling the landline at their Bengaluru home, but no one answered. This absence of contact made her deeply uneasy. Whenever she did manage to reach someone on the phone, it was always Srinand who answered. He repeatedly gave vague explanations, sometimes saying Shakira had traveled to another city, other times claiming she was overseas. Initially, Saba believed his excuses, but as the months went by and she still couldn't speak to her mother directly, her worry turned into suspicion. Each time she called, she was given a new reason for her mother's absence. As the weeks stretched into months, Saba grew restless. Something didn't feel right. Her mother had always made an effort to keep in touch despite their differences. Now, she had seemingly vanished without a trace. For nearly 9 months, Saba persistently asked about her mother's whereabouts, but Srinand continued to evade her questions. Every time she called, he assured her that Shakira was fine but conveniently unavailable. He claimed she was away on business trips, attending spiritual retreats, or even traveling abroad. However, he never allowed Saba to speak to her mother directly. By now, Saba was growing desperate. She sensed that something was very wrong. Finally, frustrated and angry, she gave Srinand an ultimatum. She told him that if he didn't let her talk to her mother soon, she would go to the police. Sensing that his web of lies was beginning to collapse, Srinand quickly changed his story. He told Saba that her mother had been pregnant and had gone to a hospital to give birth. He specifically mentioned Roosevelt General Hospital, a name he fabricated on the spot, and told Saba to call them to speak with her mother. Clinging to the hope that she might finally hear her mother's voice, Saba immediately dialed the hospital's number. However, when she asked about a patient named Shakira KH, the hospital staff informed her that no such person had ever been admitted there. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. Srinand had been lying all along. Now more certain than ever that something terrible had happened, Saba decided that she could no longer sit back and wait. She had to take action. Determined to uncover the truth, Saba traveled to Bengaluru in June 1992 and immediately went to the Ashok Nagar police station to file a missing person report for her mother, Shakira KH. She was firm in her suspicion that Srinand was responsible for her mother's disappearance. Given that Shakira came from a well-known royal family, the police took the case seriously and began their investigation right away. When they questioned Srinand about Shakira's whereabouts, he remained calm and insisted that she had gone on an extended vacation. He brushed off the allegations, portraying Saba's concerns as baseless worries. At this stage, the police had no concrete evidence against Srinand. No one had seen or heard from Shakira in over a year, but there was no proof of foul play either. Despite Saba's repeated insistence that something was wrong, the authorities hesitated to take strong action. Meanwhile, Srinand had already reinvented himself. By 1991, he had adopted the identity of Swami Sadanand, posing as a religious guru with a growing number of influential followers. Among his devotees were politicians, businessmen, and high-ranking officials who protected him. His powerful connections made it difficult for the police to question him aggressively. For the next 3 years, the case remained open, but there were no new leads. The police had no evidence, no witnesses, and no body. Meanwhile, Srinand continued living in Shakira's luxurious mansion, completely unbothered by the investigation. He hosted grand parties, entertained guests, and acted as if nothing had happened. But even as the police were preparing to close the case, fate had other plans. A drunken confession was about to break the mystery wide open. By April 1994, 3 long years had passed since Shakira KH's disappearance. Despite Saba's relentless efforts, the case remained unsolved. The Bengaluru Crime Branch, which had taken over the investigation, had found no solid leads, no physical evidence, and no confession from the main suspect, Srinand. Frustrated with the lack of progress, the authorities were preparing to close the case. However, on April 29, 1994, an unexpected event changed everything. That evening, a plainclothes police officer from the Karnataka police was stationed near a liquor shop when he overheard a drunk man loudly criticizing the police. The intoxicated man mocked them, saying they were incompetent and useless for failing to solve a major crime. Intrigued, the officer engaged the man in conversation, pretending to be just another customer. Encouraged by the alcohol in his system, the man spoke freely and carelessly. He blurted out, "Our boss committed a murder and buried the body in the house, and the police couldn't even figure it out." The officer, now fully attentive, continued questioning him casually. The man, growing more agitated, went on to say, "Ever heard of Shakira KH? She was our boss's wife. He killed her, put her in a coffin, and buried her right inside the house. I even helped him buy the coffin." The moment the police officer heard the name Shakira KH, he knew he had stumbled upon something huge. Her name had been circulated across every police station in Karnataka for 3 years. Without wasting a moment, he alerted his superiors and reported everything he had just learned. By the next morning, the police had tracked down the drunken man to question him further. Now sober, he hesitated, realizing the gravity of what he had revealed the night before. However, under pressure from the authorities, he eventually admitted that he used to work for Srinand, but had quit about a year and a half ago. With this information, the crime branch immediately followed up on his most important claim: the purchase of a coffin. If Srinand had truly buried Shakira inside his house, there had to be a record of the coffin purchase. The police visited multiple coffin shops in Bengaluru, determined to verify the story. Finally, after checking records, they found a coffin shop owner who confirmed that Srinand, now living under the name Swami Sadanand, had purchased a custom-made coffin 3 years earlier. According to the shopkeeper, Srinand had visited the shop with a servant, claiming he needed the coffin to store a life-sized antique statue. Since it was an unusual request, the shopkeeper clearly remembered the incident. This was a major breakthrough. Now, the police had both a witness, the former servant, and physical evidence, the coffin purchase record, linking Srinand to Shakira's disappearance. Armed with this new evidence, the Bengaluru Crime Branch decided to act swiftly. On April 30, 1994, they arrived at 81 Richmond Road, the grand mansion where Shakira had lived with Srinand before she vanished. At first, Srinand remained calm and confident, dismissing all accusations. He claimed that Shakira had left on her own and that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. However, when the police brought in his former servant, his behavior changed dramatically. He became visibly nervous and started sweating. He attempted to use his powerful political and business connections to intimidate the officers, but the crime branch refused to back down. As the interrogation intensified, the pressure became unbearable for Srinand. Realizing that the police now had enough evidence to search the house, he knew he could no longer maintain his deception. Under immense stress, he broke down and confessed. Srinand admitted that he had murdered Shakira KH and buried her body inside the house, beneath the very floor where he had hosted parties for years. After securing Srinand's confession, the police immediately began excavating the house. They tore up the luxurious Italian marble flooring in the central area of the mansion. As they dug deeper, they soon discovered something shocking: a large wooden coffin buried underground. When they opened the coffin, they found Shakira KH's skeletal remains. The discovery was recorded on video, marking it as one of India's first documented crime scene recordings. To confirm the identity of the remains, the police conducted DNA testing, another first in India's forensic history. The test results proved beyond doubt that the skeleton belonged to Shakira KH. During the forensic examination, they found something even more horrifying: scratch marks covering the inside of the coffin's lid. This chilling detail revealed the true horror of Shakira's final moments. She had not died immediately. Instead, she had woken up inside the coffin, trapped underground, and had desperately tried to scratch and claw her way out before ultimately suffocating to death. The brutality of the crime shocked the entire nation. The idea that a man had not only buried his wife alive for money, but had also continued partying on the very floor beneath which she lay, was beyond comprehension. The case instantly became one of the most horrifying murder cases in Indian history. With the discovery of the body and forensic evidence, the police formally arrested Srinand on April 30, 1994. Now, they had irrefutable proof of his crime. As the investigation progressed, the police began to uncover the full horror of Shakira's murder. Until this point, much of what was known had been pieced together through witness testimonies, circumstantial evidence, and forensic analysis. But now, the authorities had a clear picture of how the crime had unfolded. Shakira was a wealthy and influential woman, but despite her financial success, her personal life was marked by struggles. After the death of her first husband, she had been left to manage her estate alone. This made her vulnerable, particularly when it came to matters of love and companionship. Enter Srinand, a man who, at first, seemed like the answer to her loneliness. He presented himself as a spiritual guru, someone with divine powers who could help Shakira conceive a son, something she desperately wanted. But behind this facade of mysticism was a cold-blooded manipulator who saw Shakira not as a partner, but as an opportunity. After their marriage, Srinand quickly asserted control over Shakira's wealth. He convinced her to hand over large portions of her fortune to him, claiming he needed it for spiritual purposes. But as time passed, Shakira grew suspicious. She began to realize that Srinand's interest in her was purely financial. Worse still, she planned to divide her estate among her daughters, a move that would leave Srinand with nothing. This was the turning point. Srinand knew that if he allowed Shakira to go through with her plan, he would lose everything he had worked for. He couldn't let that happen. He needed a way to eliminate her, but it had to be done in a way that wouldn't raise suspicion. Killing a wealthy, high-profile woman like Shakira wasn't easy. If she simply disappeared, the police would launch an immediate investigation. So, he devised a methodical plan. First, Srinand gained Shakira's trust completely. He continued to act as a loving husband, ensuring that she had no idea of the danger she was in. Then, he began preparing the crime scene. He arranged for a coffin to be built, under the guise of religious rituals. He told workers that he needed it for a special burial ceremony, making sure that no one suspected anything unusual. On the night of the murder, Srinand drugged Shakira's tea with a powerful sedative. As she drank it, she slowly lost consciousness. But instead of waiting for her to die, he had something far more sinister planned. He wanted her to suffer. Once she was unconscious, he placed her inside the coffin he had specially prepared. He sealed the lid shut, trapping her inside. Then, with the help of his accomplices, he buried the coffin beneath the floor of their house, making sure it was completely covered. He had already instructed laborers to lay new marble flooring over the site, ensuring that no one would ever suspect a grave lay beneath it. But the most horrifying part? Shakira wasn't dead when she was buried. As forensic experts later confirmed, the scratches found on the inside of the coffin lid proved that she had regained consciousness after being buried alive. She had fought desperately for her life, scratching at the wood, trying to escape. But it was impossible. The coffin was airtight, and as time passed, the oxygen levels ran out. Eventually, she suffocated to death, alone and terrified in the dark. Srinand, meanwhile, felt no remorse. He had executed his plan perfectly, and with Shakira gone, he now had access to her entire fortune. For the next 3 years, Srinand continued to live in luxury in the same house where Shakira's body lay buried. The sheer arrogance and cold-bloodedness of this act was staggering. Most criminals would try to distance themselves from the crime scene, but Srinand was different. He felt untouchable. To the outside world, he was a wealthy and respected man, a spiritual leader with many followers. He hosted lavish parties, inviting powerful politicians, businessmen, and religious figures to his home. They ate, drank, and danced, all while Shakira's body lay just beneath their feet. His influence and reputation protected him from suspicion. Even when people asked about Shakira's absence, he had a simple answer. She had gone abroad for spiritual reasons. Because of his connections, no one questioned him. But karma has its way of catching up. Srinand's downfall came in the most unexpected way. Through a drunken confession by one of his former servants. One night, a former worker from the mansion got drunk at a local bar. In his intoxicated state, he let slip a dark secret. He knew where Shakira's body was buried. The news reached the police, who immediately launched an investigation. When the police arrived at 81 Richmond Road, Srinand initially denied everything. He was confident that they would find nothing. But as officers began tearing up the marble floor, panic set in. And then, they found it. The coffin was unearthed, and inside lay Shakira's skeletal remains. The scratch marks on the coffin's interior confirmed what investigators had feared: she had been buried alive. The forensic evidence was undeniable. DNA tests confirmed the remains were Shakira's, and with this, Srinand's web of lies collapsed. The case became one of the most talked about crimes in Indian history. The public was outraged, demanding justice. Srinand was arrested immediately, but he still tried to manipulate the system. He used his connections to delay the trial, claiming innocence. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The trial of Srinand was one of the most high-profile cases India had ever seen. It wasn't just about murder, it was about deception, cruelty, and pure evil. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of the crime. 150 witnesses testified against him, including forensic experts, former servants, and even his own associates. The evidence was undeniable. Srinand had planned and executed the murder with precision, all for money. The public and media followed the trial closely, horrified by the details that emerged. When the forensic team revealed that Shakira had been buried alive, the courtroom fell silent. Even hardened police officers struggled to comprehend the level of cruelty involved. Srinand, however, showed no remorse. He continued to deny everything, even as the evidence mounted against him. But the judge saw through his lies. On May 21, 2005, the Bengaluru Sessions Court sentenced him to death. The judge called it the rarest of the rare cases, stating that no punishment other than death would be sufficient for such an inhumane crime. The verdict was met with applause, both inside and outside the courtroom. People felt a sense of relief. Justice had finally been served. Even after his sentencing, Srinand tried to avoid his fate. He filed multiple appeals, delaying his execution for years. But in the end, justice prevailed. The case became a landmark in India's legal history, setting new precedents for how forensic evidence was used. It also led to stricter laws regarding financial fraud in marriages, preventing similar crimes from happening again. To this day, 81 Richmond Road remains a symbol of horror, a house where a woman's final screams were never heard. Shakira's story serves as a reminder of the dangers of greed, manipulation, and unchecked power. And though she may be gone, justice ensured that she was never forgotten. Even after being sentenced to death, Srinand refused to accept his fate. He was a man who had lived his entire life manipulating people, and now, he sought to manipulate the legal system to save himself. His lawyers immediately filed an appeal with the Karnataka High Court, arguing that the trial was flawed and that the evidence was circumstantial. They claimed that since Shakira's body had been buried for years, there was no direct proof that she had been buried alive. They also tried to cast doubt on the testimonies of key witnesses, suggesting they had been coerced by the police. However, the prosecution was well prepared. They countered every argument with solid forensic evidence. DNA tests, The scratch marks inside the coffin and the testimonies of forensic experts proved beyond doubt that Shakira had been alive when she was buried. The intentional concealment of her body under the marble floor showed premeditation. This was not a crime of passion, but a cold-blooded murder planned well in advance. The media coverage was relentless. Public anger continued to grow as people followed every twist and turn in the case. Many legal experts argued that Cyanide was simply delaying the inevitable, using legal loopholes to buy time. After 2 years of deliberation, the Karnataka High Court upheld the death sentence, stating that this was indeed one of the rarest of rare cases and that there was no room for leniency. The judgment reaffirmed that Cyanide had murdered his wife in the most inhumane manner possible, all for financial gain. But Cyanide didn't give up. He filed another appeal, this time to the Supreme Court of India, hoping to have his sentence reduced to life imprisonment. As the case reached the Supreme Court, Cyanide's legal team argued that his advanced age should be considered as a factor for leniency. They claimed that keeping him in prison for life would be punishment enough, and that executing him would be unjust. However, the Supreme Court judges were unmoved. They reviewed all the evidence again and found that the trial had been conducted fairly, with no legal errors. The forensic findings, the witness testimonies, and Cyanide's own history of financial manipulation painted a clear picture. He had not only murdered his wife, but had done so in a manner that shocked the conscience of society. In their ruling, the Supreme Court upheld the death penalty, calling it a crime of extreme brutality that deserved the maximum punishment. They stated that if such crimes were not punished with the strictest possible measures, it would send the wrong message to society. With the Supreme Court's decision, Cyanide had only one option left, a mercy petition to the President of India. This was his last attempt to avoid the death sentence. Cyanide's lawyers filed the clemency plea, arguing that since he had already spent years in prison, he should be allowed to live the rest of his life behind bars instead of being executed. They also cited his old age as a reason for mercy. However, the Home Ministry rejected the petition, stating that the crime was too horrific to warrant mercy. Finally, the President of India denied the appeal, sealing Cyanide's fate once and for all. With all legal options exhausted, the date for Cyanide's execution was set. On the morning of August 22, 2013, he was taken to the Bengaluru Central Prison, where he was to be hanged until death. In the days leading up to his execution, Cyanide showed no signs of remorse. Unlike some prisoners who seek forgiveness or express regret, he remained cold and defiant. He continued to claim that he was wrongly convicted, insisting that he had nothing to do with his wife's death. However, his final hours were marked by unease. Prison officials noted that as the execution drew closer, Cyanide became visibly tense. On the night before his hanging, he barely ate his last meal and spent most of his time pacing in his cell. At 5:30 a.m., he was taken to the gallows. A small group of witnesses, including prison officials, doctors, and a magistrate, were present. When asked for his final words, Cyanide simply said, "I have nothing to say." At 6 a.m. sharp, the lever was pulled, and Cyanide was hanged. A doctor confirmed his death a few minutes later. Justice had finally been served. The public reaction was one of relief and closure. Many felt that the legal system had done its job, ensuring that a man who had committed one of the most heinous crimes in history was not allowed to escape punishment. The media covered the execution extensively, with news channels discussing the brutality of the crime, the lengthy legal battles, and the impact of the case on Indian criminal law. Even after the case was closed and Cyanide was executed, the impact of the crime lingered. It remained a cautionary tale, a reminder of how greed, deception, and unchecked power could lead to unspeakable horrors. The case had a major impact on Indian law, particularly in how forensic evidence was used in criminal investigations. The importance of forensic science, especially in cases involving concealed bodies, was now widely recognized. This led to improvements in how police and forensic teams handled missing persons cases and financially motivated murders. The public was deeply affected by the details of the crime. Shakira's tragic fate, the fact that she was buried alive, struggling for her life in her final moments, was something that haunted people for years. Many social activists used this case to highlight the vulnerabilities of women in financially exploitative marriages. The house at 81 Richmond Road became a symbol of horror. It was eventually abandoned, with no one willing to live in a place where such a terrible crime had taken place. For years people avoided the property, believing it to be haunted by Shakira's restless spirit. As time passed, the story of Cyanide and Shakira became legendary. It was adapted into books, documentaries, and even TV crime shows, ensuring that future generations would never forget the brutality of the crime and the importance of justice. Despite everything, one question remained. What if the former servant had never spoken up? Would Cyanide have gotten away with the perfect crime? It was a chilling thought, reminding people of how many crimes remain hidden, simply because no one dares to speak the truth. In the end, justice was served, but at a terrible cost.